All right, well, good afternoon. Thank you for joining us for another digital event with ArchVision. My name's Kelsey. I'm Sales Operations Manager. I'm joined today by Sam Anderson, Technical Marketing Consultant, Corey Rubidoux, CEO of ArchVision. We are thrilled today to bring you Ask Me Anything, Epic Games Tools. Sam Anderson is going to take this one for us. She has got years of experience in the visualization industry. She's also an authorized Unreal instructor. She has so much knowledge and is so thrilled to be able to share that with you today. A little bit about the format. We have the chat open. You're welcome to drop questions, comments in there. We will try to get to them. If not through the presentation, then at the end during Q&A. So with that said, I will turn it over to Sam.
Awesome. Thank you, Kelsey. And yeah, welcome to everyone. As Kelsey mentioned, this is a very casual Ask Me Anything. I do have a project pulled up both in Twinmotion and Unreal, and I'm just going to go through and run through some of the things that I like to do while I'm working in Unreal. But if you have any questions, this time is for you to ask any of those questions. And if I know the answer, I will dive into it as a demo base, but if not, then I'll do my best to get that answer for you. But yeah, with that, feel free to use the chat for any questions. And if not, I'm going to go ahead and just kind of walk through and start talking about the model that I have pulled up here. So this is a ArchVision model that has been brought into Unreal Engine using Revit. If you joined for one of the earlier digital events in which it was a Epic Games overview where we talked about a bunch of the tools, this model was covered. In the future, we actually have a few additional events that ArchVision will be taking a part of. So let me go ahead and I'll drag and share that information first, just for anyone, in case anyone is familiar with those and wants to join in. But let me go ahead and just kind of get those dates on the screen for you. So we will be at Unreal Fest Seattle this year from September 30th to October 1st. I will be doing a presentation on October 1st. I'll be diving into photorealistic imagery and talking more about all the different asset options that you have with both Epic Games and ArchVision. So I'll be covering some of the RPC content as well as MetaHuman, Quixel, Sketchfab, and talk about some of the workflows that I use in order to get assets into the models quickly. In addition to this event, we have two additional digital events coming up for ArchVision. One of them, this is the later one, so this is going to be in November. This is going to be an Unreal Engine Basics. So this is going to be great for anyone who has heard of Unreal Engine or has played around with it a little bit and wants to kind of dive in. So there's a lot of different resources out there within the Epic ecosystem of how to get started on Unreal Engine. There are a lot of different end solutions. So whether you're in gaming or automotive, there's going to be different approaches that you take. So this one's going to be geared a little bit more towards architecture. So really talking about use this type of lighting for this use case and kind of just getting to the most succinct, sufficient way of building out Unreal Engine models for architecture purposes. And then the week before that, we will actually have one for Twinmotion as well. So this is going to be for anyone who has, potentially is also using Inkscape or Lumion, and they've heard of Twinmotion and want to explore it a little bit, or maybe they're transitioning, or maybe they want to be able to use both. This is going to be a very basic overview of Twinmotion, how to get started, building out projects. So going to be great for anyone who is brand new to that world. So these will be a little bit more technical step-by-step as opposed to the overview that we had previously. The overview was kind of describing all of the different tools and some of the workflows with Revit. These are going to be a little bit more step-by-step for the most part. So just wanted to bring those to your attention if you are interested in exploring those and joining for those. But let's see. Yeah, thank you, Kelsey, for sharing that. The registration invitations will be out for those soon, so you can register. Also, if you want to just get that information, have it, feel free to reach out to me or Kelsey or ArchVision. We can get that information for you. But for now, since we don't have any questions just yet, I'm going to explore this Unreal Engine model and just talk about some of the things that I like to do as I'm working on a project. So this project has been brought in. I've used the Twinmotion template to get it started. So started this project in Twinmotion and then used the new Unreal Engine workflow that goes from Twinmotion to Unreal Engine with the newest Twinmotion version. So I explored that a little bit or covered that a little bit in the last little bit. But so we have this project here. I actually went ahead and replaced the railing here using modeling tools in Unreal Engine. So I'll just go ahead and pull that up. This is something that I have been using a lot inside of Unreal Engine. So if you explore this tab, this modeling tab, then you'll get to see all of the different options that Unreal Engine has. If you are working in Unreal Engine and don't have this modeling tab, it is because it is a plugin that is enabled. So I typically start with the architecture templates when I get started. So this is already enabled. But if you wanted to enable it, you could always come to Edit, Plugins, and then you can type in Modeling, and you'll see that you do have a modeling tools editor mode that you can add in here. Now, this can be very helpful. One thing that I haven't explored too much, but I know is a possibility is there is some scripting modeling tools as well that allows you to create your own scripts to improve some of the modeling procedures inside of Unreal Engine. So that is possible if you are, whenever you're modeling, always looking to see how you can improve time there. Now, some of the things that I like to use are a lot of the UVs. Sometimes when I get projects, the UVs might have been created for a certain visualization or not created at all. So I do use these UVs a lot. One thing that's nice about this is if you right-click any of these, then you can add to faves. So this project UVs is the one that I use the most. So here under faves, you'll see that I have all of the different modeling tools that I use all the time. Now, the pattern here is going to be similar to an array, and this is what I use for a lot of different projects. So if we have time later on, I might explore that a little bit, but I did just want to bring that up, that this is one of the use cases of Unreal Engine that is not available on Twinmotion. Twinmotion has primitive modeling, but here you can really fine tune your models using the modeling mode. Now I'm going to go back to my project and just take a look around. So one thing that I do whenever I'm working with a project is I do try to keep the frames per second turned on. So here under show FPS, you can select that. And then you'll see that we have it here on the right-hand side. So you'll see that I have Twinmotion Revit open up on my computer. So I do have several things open up. So it's running at 30, but I probably would want to improve some of that, that FPS. Now I could do that by either changing some of the rendering settings inside of the post-process volume. One thing that I also kind of always keep in mind when I'm building projects is the textures that I'm using. So whenever you're dragging and dropping in assets and materials, perhaps from Quixel, you may not be paying attention to the texture size that comes in, or if you're working with designers who are quickly creating their own imagery for the bitmaps, you might want to double check to see what that looks like inside of your project once you bring it in. So one thing that I always like to do, I would say, I should say that I do this daily, when I probably do it more like once a week, but just checking on the texture sizes of my project by going up to Tools, Audit, and then Statistics. So once you have that pulled up, you'll see this will probably pop up with the primitive stats when you first bring it up, but it pops up with a window that might look overwhelming at first, but the thing that I'm showcasing today, once you get used to it, you'll always find it's easy to get back to understanding what the numbers mean. But I will always go over to this texture stats. And this is going to show me all of the textures that are in my project. And what I'm looking for is the memory and size of these textures. So if you've ever gotten a texture streaming and has hit the maximum, then you've probably looked up videos on how to do this. And there is an Epic Games tips and tricks on the meaning behind that and what you can do to improve that. But I have found that if I do this particular thing that I'm about to show here in a moment, then it keeps me from getting that warning over time. So essentially what I do is I come in and look at the current dimensions. And if you hit the button, it changes the way in which it sorts. So here, these two columns are the things that I like to look at. So I'm looking at the max dimension, current dimension, and then these current memory and fully loaded memory are also helpful. So you can either sort by these to see which textures are taking up the most memory, or if you want to just be very consistent and keep the textures all within 2K or 4K, then this current dimension also works. What's nice about Unreal Engine is that you can bring in a texture at a higher size. So you'll see that these are at 4K, and then you have the ability to clamp that texture size or create a maximum texture size number for that, so that it's not utilizing all of those resources if you don't want it to. So I have found that whenever you're bringing in assets from Quixel, it can be very tempting to bring them in at high quality. However, high quality means that it is coming at 8K. That's totally fine, but you would want to make sure that you're not having all of those 8K textures all the time. So Unreal Engine does this to some extent with some of the LODs. You can better control that as well. So like if you had grass in the foreground, but it's blurred out because of depth of field, then you don't need that to be 8K. So essentially, what I like to do is, all of these are 4K, which normally I would say is okay, but depending on if I'm working on like a master plan that's huge, then these could probably all be 2K. So especially when this is a normal mask for snow, I probably don't need that normal mask to be a 4K. So whenever you click on the textures on the left-hand side, the corresponding texture is going to pop up at the bottom. So I'll go ahead and click on that texture snow, and then let's double click it and take a look. So double clicking on it brings up its own window, and then here are all the features for this one texture. So I'm going to go over to the right hand side and I'll type max, and you'll see that there's a maximum texture here. So then this is where I'd come in. I'd probably put 1024. You can do 2048. The most important part is that you do keep this a power of 2. So that's going to help with some of the mapping and calculating on the back end of Unreal Engine. So that's going to be the 256, 512, 1024, 2048, and 4096. So here I've set this to 1024 and I've hit save, and then that would be good. Now, while I'm already in this folder, I might go ahead and, like, if this is a master plan where those textures don't matter too much, I might actually go in here, go to search textures, and type in _in. This brings up all the normals, and I could right click, select all of them, right click once again, and then go to asset actions. And then there's going to be an edit selection property matrix. So if you worked in previous Unreal Engine, this was a bulk edit. So now it's just a different wording here. So in property matrix, totally fine that it just has a different wording. It's going to pop up with a new window, and it's going to have similar aspects on the right-hand side to the settings that we just looked at for that individual texture. So essentially, this is allowing us to do a bulk edit to multiple textures. So I would do the same thing here. I would type in max, and it's probably already noticed that I've already changed some of this to a smaller size because it has multiple values. So I'll go ahead and type in 1024, hit enter. Now, this can take some time depending on how many assets you choose. So if you have 100 assets in here that you're changing at once, know that it will take some time to update, and your computer's not frozen, it's just doing the calculation. So if you wait a moment, let it do its work, and then you'll see that all of these now have an asterisk next to the texture name. That just means it's been updated and we need to save it so that it is saved and good to go. So as I mentioned, this is something that I do quite regularly for my projects. This keeps it clean. I know that there's kind of like times while you're building where you're just really dumping in a bunch of assets to build out the scene as quickly as possible to show someone. I would say once you send that image or video to the person, come back to your model, clean some of these up, you most likely won't notice. Just double check to make sure if you have any foreground issues that it is been showing up. One thing additionally is if you are coming into streaming issues, you may notice that some of your textures become blurry. I don't have any of those blurry textures in here just yet, but as you're working, if you are running into that, this process will help with that as well. And sometimes it simply just needs to be refreshed and reopened. So you can open up the texture. Let's see, working off the, there we go. Here's this texture. Sometimes all you need to do is re-pull up that texture, hit save, and it's going to reload it to the memory. So as I mentioned, that's only if you're encountering a lot of streaming texture issues. Hopefully you don't have that, but I know that sometimes I have that and it can be frustrating, and without having to restart the whole project to kind of refresh that streaming or kind of go through that whole statistics, sometimes just opening up the texture is going to give you insight into the mapping and texture size of that project. So that is something that I wanted to show. I'm also going to show the post-process volume. So whenever I create an Unreal Engine project, I do work off of the templates that Epic provides, and it always comes with some post-process volumes. Now this is these post-process volumes. So if I hit F on the computer, it's going to take me to one of them. So I always keep these two post-process volumes in. One of them you'll see is this little cube here, and then the other, I don't have a cube for, here we go, it's a little bit bigger. But one of them is applied and one of them is not, even though both of them are turned on. And essentially what is doing that is a setting within the post-process volume. So post-process volume, to like take a step back, is going to be applying all of the different rendering lighting settings for your project. They come in these cubes because sometimes you might want to have different rooms with different settings. So this can be very helpful if you're working on an architecture project, an interior one, that as you're moving throughout the space, you might not want to have auto exposure on because it's getting blown out as it moves through. You could create different boxes for different settings depending on the mood or atmosphere that you want for each room. So essentially, when you open up the Unreal Engine project for the first time, you are getting these two different boxes. And one of them is going to have it applied to the project in its whole entity. So I'm going to type in infinite here, and you'll see that this infinite extent unbound is set as true. So that means that this post-process volume is being applied to the whole model. Now, if I turn this off, there's not a whole lot of settings here, but I'm going to go ahead and uncheck this infinite extent, turn it off just for the use case of showing the differences between the two post-process volumes. And I'm going to go up to this NPR one. So NPR stands for non-photorealism. So this is going to have a tune material applied to it. This is something that Unreal Engine and the developers have learned that this can be a very useful tool for architects, but can take a little bit of time for setting up. So they have this ready for you so that you can turn it on when needed. So here I already have the infinite typed in here, and I'm just simply going to turn that on. It might take a moment to load, but let me jump back into, I just hit 1 on the keyboard because I have a few saved here. But when I hit 1 on that keyboard, now I'm in the project, and now I have the tune material applied, meaning that essentially there are splines or lines around each geometry. So this can be helpful if you just want to showcase a project without diving too much into the materials, but have it more be about the geometry and how you're communicating that to your client. So that can be very, very helpful if needed. So this is something that I sometimes use as I'm showcasing massing, modeling, anything that needs to just be zoomed out a little bit as far as photorealism goes. In order to talk a little bit about how I just jumped to that, whenever you hit 1, 2, 3 on your keyboard, you can assign different views to that so that it's easier to jump around. All you have to do is hold down Control on your keyboard, hit a number, and then you have that number applied to it. So right then I just hit 9 on my keyboard, and as I jump, you'll see there's jump to bookmark 2, bookmark 1, and now I go to bookmark 9, and it's in that view again. So this is another tool that I use. So if I'm on a call with someone and we're talking about camera views, I can either set up a bookmark when I'm like, hey, this looks good, what do you think? I could hit Control and a number to get a bookmark. Or you also have the ability to come up to the left-hand side, go down to the bottom, and you can select Create Camera here. So you do have these options. And just as we're kind of talking through these workflows, I do typically pick the Cine Camera Actor here. Those are the cameras that I prefer to use. Additionally, sometimes when I'm working on screen and showcasing the project to someone, I also like to edit some of this field of view just to give them kind of like realistic look at the viewport as I'm moving around the camera. Okay, so that was kind of like a scattered little bit of tips and tricks. Just going to pause for a moment to see if there's any questions or anything. If not, then I might jump into Twinmotion for a little bit.
Sam, I do have a quick question for you here.
Okay.
Why do you prefer to use the Cine camera over the just regular camera?
Yeah, so the Cine camera, from my understanding, is the kind of latest release camera for having all of the different camera settings that are most similar to a real life camera. So the camera actor is, I'm going to use the word legacy. So it's kind of like the legacy camera actor that's used in Unreal Engine, and it can be used a lot for some of the walkthroughs or more, I would say, animated programmatic elements, whereas the Cine camera actor is used for more accurate to life camera settings, if that makes sense.
Makes sense. Thank you.
Cool. Okay, well, there's no other questions for Unreal at this moment, then I'm going to go ahead and jump into the Twinmotion model. And we'll take a look at this too. So this is going to be the same model. We're here in Twinmotion. This is working off one of the Twinmotion templates where we've added in our project to the back there. I've got some depth of field in here turned on, so you can see that in the distance back there. But I wanted to take a moment to showcase some of the new features that are embedded inside of the latest Twinmotion release. So I'm going to pull up a website here, and I see Scott's on the call. I know that I've probably shown you this many times, but this is something that I do always like to kind of come back to see what has been released, what's in the works. This is also a great place, and I encourage people to tell anyone they're working with who might be working in Inkscape, Lumia, and coming into Twinmotion, and if they feel frustrated that there is not a feature that's inside Twinmotion, you can go in and submit ideas here, and this does go to the Twinmotion team. They're evaluating this stuff, they're taking notes, and really listening to the users. So this is something that I encourage you to submit ideas to if you do encounter anything like that. But for now, I'll take a moment to talk a little bit about some of these. So in this little tips that I'm showing, I'll talk about the render layers today, as well as the spacing tool. So I think these are some of the really cool things that come with Twinmotion, as well as the area tool. So I may have shown a little bit of this in the previous overview, but I'm going to dive in just a little bit more to some of this stuff. And then you can always get the full release notes here. So this is going to have much more detailed information about all of the updates. This is also nice because you can see what is in progress. So this is always fun to look at, to kind of see what is on the horizon for Twinmotion, to see what's coming out. So I know one of the things that I'm super excited for is this parallax window. So that will be useful for architecture, especially for context building. So being able to showcase, or I guess fake some windows to make it look like it has assets in it without having to drop in tons of assets that will bring down the model. So very excited about that one. I think that one's going to be a great one. And then Nanite as well. So since I am an Unreal Engine user, it is really nice being able to work in Unreal Engine really quickly with very dense models. So I'll be excited to get that inside of Twinmotion. Essentially, it's breaking down those models and triangulating them. And so in a way that Unreal can kind of compress them and make them visible without having having it take up all the memory of your computer. So another thing that will be very helpful for architecture use cases in the future. So I just want to bring that up and talk about a few of those things there. But here, I'll go ahead and talk about some of the spacing tools that I just showcased. So let me just refresh the screen. I've got this camera pulled up here that I'm working off of, and I'm going to place some assets along the road here. So whenever you go to populate at the bottom of the screen, you have a couple of different options on the right-hand side. If you're familiar with Twinmotion, you might be used to paths, which have been splice or spline-based tools. So you can create characters, bicycle paths, vehicle paths by creating a spline. And now essentially they allow you to do that with some of the foliage as well. So here, when you hit place, you always used to have this paint and scatter option, and then now you have spacing and area. So if I click on spacing here, it'll pop up with a window that says drop an asset in here. Now you can use assets any that you would like. So if you brought in assets as well, you could drag and drop those assets in here. For now, I'm just going to pull in some trees, and then I will start placing them around. So I'm going to place, I know we have some trees already in here, but if we wanted this to be perfectly aligned with this guardrail here, all I'm doing is I'm using the left mouse button to create the spline, and then I can use the right mouse button and it will stop that spline. So now when I come to take a look at the spline here, we've got a plus sign, so I could hit that plus sign and move that around if I wanted to. You also have the ability to switch some of the assets. So if I wanted to add in a new asset here, I can drop that in and it's going to apply it to the spline. I'm just going to change the depth of field here so that we can see it a little clearer. So I'm going to go turn that off. And then we can take a look at the trees again. So I've got that spline here. Now, what's cool is this doesn't have to only be trees. This could be assets of any kind. So I'm going to select the spacing tool in the scene graph once again on the right-hand side. And then here under the assets, I'm going to go over to library, objects, and I'm going to go to city, and then I'm going to go to street lights. So I'm going to drag and drop in these street lights. And you might see that there are some of the trees that are now replaced with street lights. There they are. Here it is. So you can imagine how helpful this can be as you are building out scenes, and if you want sidewalks to be populated with benches and trash cans and lights, you can do this. You can do this for railing if you wanted to. There's a lot of different use cases of this. So here in the scattering, you have some options. So I can turn up the count up or down. It might take a moment to load. Once you pick your count, you can select random order. So you have some different settings here that allows you to scale, fine tune, and apply those settings to your project. Now, in addition to this, one of the things that we talked about a moment ago was the render layers. So this is something that is huge for Twinmotion. I know it's been on many people's wish list for years and years. So I'm very happy that it's here. And what essentially this is going to do is allow you to have better control in your post-processing. So if you're creating still imagery and want to fine-tune some of these elements in post, you'll be able to. So down at the bottom, you'll see that there is a layer ID. So essentially most assets now in the scene graph will have the ability to turn this on. And what you'll see that there's an enable option here. And then you're going to have 5 different IDs. So essentially you may have to be a little creative of how you're going to use this in the very end so that you understand which layer you want this to be applied to. So if you've used V-Ray in the past, it's going to be a little bit different than I think it's called like the Cryptomat, or I know that there's a lot of those kind of like different rendering options that you get when you export something. This is going to be a little bit more fine-tuned to the different assets that you assign it to. Now, here on this spline, I'm going to assign this as render layer ID 1. So now whenever I render, I could turn on this render layer ID so that it renders both the image and then another image of the same size, but with just the assets that I have applied the render layer ID 1 to. So to take a look at that, I'm going to go over to the export tab here. And let's look on the right-hand side. Put this export. Okay, so now say I wanted to export image number 6, the one I'm working with here. I have that selected. You can select details right underneath that format. And you'll see that you have render layers here that you can select. So you could do this for the sky. If you wanted to have the sky on a different layer, this can be very helpful if you have a team or if you have access to a lot of HDRIs that you like to use in Photoshop. You could do that so that you have easier access to switch that out. For now, I'll just select layer 1, and then you can choose export as mass or not. So essentially what that's doing is if it's selected, it's going to render out as black and white. That way, whenever you come into your post-processing tool of choice, you can select either the black or white so that you can easier control and set up mask inside of Photoshop. If you wanted to just come in as a PNG with just the elements rendered, then you would deselect that. And then once you hit export, let me go ahead. I'll go ahead and just export this, and we'll see how long it takes here. But essentially, when you do add on additional render layer IDs, it is going to increase the time of your render because it is rendering it out multiple times. So I do just want to make sure that people are aware that that is happening at the same time. In case you are running into very long render times, you might want to be aware of at what times you want to render out that specific render layer. So that's something to keep in mind, but I'll let this run for a little bit. And in the meantime, I'll pause for a second and see if there's any chats. And it looks like we do have one. So let's see, this says, what tips do you have to manage importing and exporting large scale projects such as a master plan site, 10+ buildings in Unreal or Twinmotion? That is a great question. So in Unreal Engine, so you probably already know about this, but there is something called data prep, which you can use to fine-tune some of your import process. What essentially this does is it allows you to create recipes so that whenever you import your project, you run these recipes and it goes through and you can set up different parameters of if something is smaller than X amount, delete it. It also allows you to do some optimization there too, as far as you could apply some geometry scripting models there. So if you wanted to go ahead and I guess like change the tessellation of some of those elements, you could do that there. That one does take a little bit more time to set up, and I would say requires a more advanced Unreal Engine user to develop, but there are some resources on the Unreal Engine YouTube that do have how to start that data prep and how to use that data prep. But what's cool is once you do have those recipes, you can save them and use them for future projects. Scott, I can send you some of those resources if you want. In Twinmotion, there's a couple of different things that I do. So if I'm bringing in something that's a master plan, I'll look at the things that I might need to edit inside of the project. So if I go over to the import settings for some of these, so I have a couple of different FBXs here. If I see if I can do this with one of them. Yeah, okay, so this is a Revit model. I'm going to pull up the directly settings. Oh, I don't have this Revit one open. Let me see if I can. This one's not linked either. Let's see if it will pull up. Okay, well, I can try to get this going, but essentially, whenever you bring in a new Twinmotion project, Let me just bring in a geometry here. Let's see. Okay, I don't have something easy to access right now, but when you bring in a project, I do have Revit open. Let me see if I can look at the settings there. I thought I had. Let's see, let's pull up Revit. We'll take a look at some of the settings here. Essentially, there are a couple of different settings that you control in Revit or in your Datasmith settings in general that are going to allow you to optimize some of your projects. So say I'm bringing in a master plan and I know that there are context buildings that I'm not going to change materials to. I will bring that all in as condensed by materials and then keep the projects that or the models that I know I'm going to have to change individual elements. I'll keep them and bring them in as is. So that takes a little bit of strategic thinking. And if you're working with other people, you might want to have a system for that so that you understand why someone can't change this context building for some reason, but does have access to change the foreground building. So there's a few different things that you can keep in mind there. So let me just open up one of these Entourage and let's take a look at some of the settings and see if we can get views into this. But essentially, whenever you bring new projects in, you do have the ability to change some of these settings. So I'll go over to these export settings, and perhaps you're already using these, but if not, I do want to bring them up. So you do have this level of tessellation. This is set at 8, and this is from the developers at Epic and Autodesk have worked to come to this number that is, in their mind, a good number for bringing in a level of tessellation that's going to give you a fine-tuned geometry without having something be too faceted. However, if you are working with a lot of geometry, you can bring this number down to 4 or 5, and it's going to have a little bit more facets in your geometry, but it's going to really reduce the number of triangles that are being used inside of Twinmotion and Unreal. And so that's something that I play around with as I'm bringing in some of those big projects and big models. So that's something that I would do. Also, if I just wanted to clean some stuff up, I might actually remove some of the metadata. This isn't going to be a huge saver, but will just help kind of clean some stuff up if that's something that you're looking for. Beyond that, that's kind of the one thing that I do look for whenever I'm bringing projects into Unreal or Twinmotion. Additionally, something in Unreal is that I like to have everything actually using Nanite if Nanite is available. So, or what I should say is compatible. So many times I will do project audits with teams to see, is their project performing well? And a lot of the time I see Nanite applied to like a few things, but not everything. And so this is something that I just want to help educate. If you have a project, everything that should have Nanite should, or like if anything can have Nanite, it should have Nanite applied. That's just going to make it easier for Unreal Engine to read all of the objects. So it's not having to calculate, like some of these are using Nanite and some of them aren't. It's just saying, okay, everything that has Nanite can have Nanite. And you can look at that by coming up to lit mode at the top left-hand side, going to Nanite visualization, turning on triangles, and you'll see that everything I have here does have Nanite because it has these triangles applied, except for these black mullions around the windows. So the reason why I don't have that applied is because this mullion is attached to this window and currently translucent materials cannot have Nanite applied to them. So I have that turned off. If I was going for optimal performance here, I would go in and there is a command that is available in the, what is it called? There's a sample project, Hillside sample project, that has a command in there that will take the geometry, separate that geometry based off the shading model. So it will take a look and say, this geometry has a glass material applied to it because it has a translucent shading model, and it will separate them and it will apply Nanite to the mullions and not apply Nanite to the glass. So there are some tools in that hillside sample project that I'd really encourage you to check out, because that team did combine Rhino 3ds Max models inside of Unreal Engine and created these tools so that each time they brought it in, they could make it as optimal as possible. And so it is an editor utility widget that it works great. I've used it on a lot of projects. I have not used it on this one, but that's something that I would import here. So I'll take a look at the chat real quick. Let's see. Yeah, so there's just some, so it sounds like the models are coming from Max. However, in the future, using Revit, Rhino, and Max. So can you data prep converting assets to Nanite? Yes, yeah, so you are able to do that. Yeah, should be a pretty simple one. Enabling Nanite for some of those data prep assets should be pretty easy. One thing that so like there's a couple of ways of turning Nanite on to objects. So like if I select this object here, selecting it, you'll see it's the walls basic here on the right hand side. I'm going to hit Control B and it's going to pull up the asset in my content browser. So essentially, you could right click on this, select Nanite, enable Nanite. What I essentially do though is when I start a project, I'll come over to the geometries of the imported assets. I'll select all of them and I'll turn Nanite on for all of them. So this is something that you could do with your data prep so that you're not even having to do those 3 steps that I just talked about. Essentially what that will do is allow you to turn on all of those Nanite assets inside of that data prep so that each time you import it, it's already good to go. Nanite has already been applied. Scott, I can send you, there was a great video by Simon and Stephen Phillips performed where they talk about some optimization that is very helpful for large architectural projects. And they cover this. It's not a super technical step-by-step, but it is a super technical overview of some of the techniques that one should be enabling in order to get high performance out of large projects. So Scott, I can send that to you later today. But yeah, let's see. Are there any other questions that I can cover? I know I've kind of talked about a lot of random different stuff here, but just wanted to share some of the things that I have found helpful or like things that I pay attention to in Unreal Engine. Unreal Engine is such a robust tool, and so everyone has a lot of different approaches to getting the same deliverable or different deliverables. But this is something for someone who has done in rendering work for architecture firms, some of the steps that I take whenever I'm creating these models. So yeah, is there, let's see, anything else?
Sam, there are a couple of questions before we got started. So what are some of your favorite plugins to use in Unreal Engine?
Okay, yeah, so some of my favorite plugins that I like to use. So Cesium is they've just been I believe acquired by Bentley Systems, I think. I think I'm getting that right, but Cesium is essentially what I like to use when I'm pulling real world data into projects. So here I use the Iceland template project that came from Twinmotion. So if I wanted to get real Iceland in and get essentially I could do Google Maps data if I wanted to. Essentially, there is a plugin that you can bring into Unreal Engine. It allows you to set up geolocation for your project, and then you are able to source different APIs or different information out there that will bring in that context data. So that's something that I really love to work with. I also really love ArchVision. So you'll see that I have my ArchVision plugin imported here. So this allows me to bring in some more curated assets. I love using the Quixel bridge, but sometimes the assets that they are using are more historic based chairs and furniture. So this allows me to bring in some higher design curated assets, as well as post-humans also. And so that's another one that I really love to use. And yeah, I would say those are probably my top 2. I like to work with what I have inside of the Epic tools. resources. So I do really use Pixel Bridge a lot. And so that's where I get a lot of my assets as far as materials and landscape and foliage assets in. But those are the two additional plugins that I sometimes use.
Great, thanks. Since we're on Unreal Engine, another one that came in, do you use path tracing or raster rendering more in Unreal Engine?
Yeah, so yeah, there's, for anyone who's not familiar with the two differences, path tracing is going to be similar to the offline rendering. So it's going to be the convergence of the pixels to get your final result. It's going to have more accurate global illumination and ambient occlusion and reflections. That is something that came out in Unreal Engine 4.27. It's still in the latest version of Unreal Engine. However, the raster rendering, which is the real time, like what you see as you get as I move around, this is the raster rendering that I'm getting on my screen. This has improved over time. So between 4.27 and Unreal Engine 5, that is when Lumen and Nanite came into play. Lumen is the global illumination solution for that raster real-time rendering. So it is continuously getting improved. And with Unreal Engine 5.4, that just gets improved each and every single time. And so if I'm up here, I can go over to the lit version. I could hit Path Tracer, and you'll see that it's starting to render that out. I used to use this a lot when I was in Unreal Engine 4.27 and beyond, or mainly 4.27. But honestly, since 5.2, I've been using just the raster render. And this is mostly due to render time. So if I am creating a still image, I might use that path tracer just to get the highest fidelity imagery. However, if I'm doing animations or if I'm doing like 10 different images, I will simply use that raster rendering. And for the needs of most architectural projects that I'm working on, it doesn't need to be that super high resolution, 100% accurate rendering. I'm able to kind of figure out how can I get best quality with that raster real-time rendering, make some changes to the post-process volume to make sure I'm getting the quality that I want in a fraction of the time. So I recently worked on a master plan project. I had some animations and I could render multiple animations in less than an hour. Whereas if I was doing Path Tracer, it's more of an overnight rendering. So it's kind of understanding what's the final resolution that's needed, what are the deliverables that's needed, what's the schedule look like, and kind of going in between those. But honestly, if you look at some of the Hillside project renderings, or even like with this one, and I'm evaluating the two differences. Let's see, we have some more color and definition in the context. The glass changes a little bit, but those are honestly something that I can change. And like this might be because the path tracing might not be taking into effect the atmospheric fog. So these are different things that I can change and edit as needed in the raster render to get as close to the path tracing. Now, this is something that also you could use as a tool to test to see if you're getting close to that. So this is something I encourage people to do, is to kind of filter between these two, because the path tracer is giving the more accurate lighting per se. Like if you look over here on the left-hand side, the shadows are changing a little bit. So how might I change the post-process volume to better reflect that path tracing inside of the raster rendering? So that's something that I take a look into. Sorry, Kelsey, that was a very long answer, but awesome. So if there are no other questions, we may wrap it up here. So this was intended, just to be very casual, just kind of walking through some of my things that I like to do as I'm working throughout projects. But yeah, we'll see. We'll leave it open for like another few moments to see if there's any additional questions. And yeah, if not, I'll have my finished remarks in that if you are wanting to dive more into some of the logistics and setups, we do, as I mentioned, have those digital events coming up in the future. So October 29th will be for Twinmotion, if you want to put that on your calendar, as well as the Unreal Engine one, which is coming November 5th. So those are going to be more fine-tuned to each and a little bit more about getting started and sufficient workflows for both of those tools. But with that, Kelsey, I think we can wrap it up.
Sounds good, Sam, and thank you so much for today.
Thank you, Sam.